years, probably 8, 9 years in a row. Every year to different homeschooling conferences. We went to Billings, we went to Buffalo, Wyoming. We had them all over the place, and we went because it was a fun way to connect with other homeschooling families. We wanted to support homeschooling, to go be encouraged, kind of mini vacation. And Andrea used to always say that so we can find some spouses for our kids, which was hilarious. Which is, it's always true. It's what better place to find the right like-minded people than at something like that. So it was kind of a fun thing. But we enjoyed it, and honestly, me and Andrea didn't really go for the lectures. Sometimes there were some interesting ones, and some things that make you think. But we mainly went for the people, for the social interaction with other families, and to support the scene and all that sort of a thing. But one year, we had a guy get up and talk, and he gave this presentation. It was Dr. Weil, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Why is it we've been going to homeschooling conferences all these years and we've not heard this information? This is what moms and moms need to hear. I'm not that dads don't do it too. I'm a living testament to that, but generally it's the moms doing the homeschooling, right? And so this is what they need to hear. And they don't need to hear all these other things about, idiosyncrasies of certain curriculum or how to get them to like math better. I mean, maybe you do need to know those things, I suppose. But I consider this message to be the most important thing, message-wise, you can hear as a homeschooling parent. And right off the bat, I want to make sure you guys know that, you guys all know from this channel that we are a homeschooling family. And if you public school your kids, that is completely okay. So I don't want you to think if you prayed about it and you're doing what you think is right for your kids, then that's what you should do. We're not meaning to be insulting towards anybody who chooses something different than what we do. This is just what works for us. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into it, and we're going to play this. It runs about an hour, and then we'll be able to talk about it a little afterwards, and we'll kind of see where this goes. All right, without further ado, Dr. J. Weil.
Hi, my name's Jay Weil, and I'm going to be talking to you about why you should homeschool through high school. This is a very important talk to me, and I think the best way to illustrate that is to tell you how I got to know about homeschooling and why I'm such a big advocate of it today. So I got my PhD in everybody's favorite subject, nuclear chemistry, and I was appointed on the faculty at Ball State University. But one of the reasons I went there was to develop something I thought at the time was incredibly innovative. It was essentially a boarding school run by the state, and it was specifically for gifted and talented students. So if you thought your child was gifted and you wanted to get rid of your child for the last 2 years of high school, you could apply to the program, and if your child was accepted, courtesy of the state, they would go and live in a special dorm at the Ball State University campus and take a blend of either university courses they were eligible for or high school courses designed specifically for gifted and talented students. And I was brought in to do the chemistry and physics curriculum that the students use. Now, I was still appointed as a faculty member at Ball State, but that was my primary focus, working with the gifted and talented high school students. And it was a very innovative program. It only cost the taxpayer $9,000 per child per year. And that was back in the early 90s. So you can imagine what it costs these days. Once again, I was appointed in the faculty at Ball State University. And when you're a professor, you're supposed to increase the knowledge in your field. And as a scientist, that means doing experiments to discover new things. Well, experiments cost money, so you have to have somebody support you. My research was supported by the National Science Foundation, which is a tax-supported institution. So I would like to thank each and every one of you for your contributions in helping me research things that A, you couldn't care less about, and B, have no practical value whatsoever. But a lot of fun for me, and I learned a lot, so that was cool. The main point here is how I became interested in homeschooling. It wasn't because my wife and I had children to homeschool. At the time, we were double income, no kids, very committed to our church, our careers, and so forth. But as a faculty, while I was teaching at the university level there at Ball State University, my best university students were homeschool graduates. And I knew nothing about homeschooling. And I'll never forget, when this happened the first time. A student walks into my office. He's carrying the big tome that we're using for general chemistry, General Chemistry by Ebbing, 4th edition. He opens it up and he points to an equation, probably one of the most difficult equations in general chemistry. It's called the Gibbs free energy. And quite frankly, I have PhD colleagues who don't understand this equation. And so he points to this equation, and I figure he's going to ask me, how do I use this equation? I don't understand how it applies to homework or something like that. So I'm already in my head rehearsing my erudite answer to this student's questions, when suddenly he says, well, I've used this in the homework and I understand how the equation works, but I've been thinking about this equation. And suddenly all the gears in my head stop. I've got a student in my office who has been thinking about an equation. And so we ended up having this long discussion, the kind of discussion every professor dreams about. A student who's truly interested in going beyond the scope of the course. Well, I said, you obviously understand chemistry really well. You must have had a very good high school chemistry program. Where did you go to school? And he kind of looked at the floor and kind of nervously said, at home. Well, to me, that meant he was too sick to go to school. So I said, oh, so you had a tutor who would visit your teacher and bring homework? And he said, no, my mother taught me. And so I looked right at him and I said, so she's a nuclear physicist then, right? And he smiled and said, no, she never went to college. So my best student in chemistry that year had been taught at home by a mother who had never gone to college. And I found that truly fascinating. But of course, you run into fascinating things all the time. So I kind of threw that on the pile of things I'll look into at some point. Well, when I started meeting more of these students who had been taught by their untrained mothers, who were my best chemistry and physics students, I realized it was time for me to learn what this homeschooling thing was. So I did some research in the academic literature. And I found out that my experiences were common. Even in the early 90s, it was well established in the academic literature that homeschooled students are better academically than publicly and privately schooled students, on average. And so that, confirmed my experience. So I started working with homeschoolers simply to get more of them to come to Ball State University. And so I was just giving talks about, how you apply for university, what universities are looking for, that kind of thing. But then, of course, they found out I was a scientist, so they wanted me to write science curriculum. So that's what I do still to this day. I write homeschooling materials through Berean Builders. That's my current publisher. But I am an adjunct professor at Anderson University, which is a Christian university in Anderson, Indiana, my hometown, and where I live now. And adjunct just means I teach every now and again. Don't teach not regularly by any means, just sort of when I want to, which is kind of fun. Okay, so anyway, that's me. And the reason I shared this with you is because I got interested in homeschooling not because I had kids of my own, but because homeschoolers were sending me my best science students at the university level. Now, since the time I started working with homeschoolers, my wife and I ended up adopting a teenager who had been going to public school all of her life. So we brought her home and started homeschooling her. And that's when I learned what homeschooling was really about. And that's kind of an interesting thing. We professors, we're kind of interesting people because we are experts at things we've never done. So a lot of the stuff that I teach students, I've never done, right? And so here I was, a typical professor. I was talking to homeschoolers about homeschooling. I was writing curriculum for homeschoolers, and I had never done any homeschooling. If you ever want to know what's the picture of being a university professor, that's it. Teaching something you've never done yourself. But once I started homeschooling, then I realized what homeschooling is all about. And I have a couple of talks about that, how, when I started homeschooling my daughter, it was specifically for academics, and she really ended up excelling academically. But when I got done, I realized that's not the real reason we homeschool. The real reason we homeschool, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, is it builds seriously good familial relationships. Usually, not always, but usually. So anyway, that's the main point. I just wanted to tell you that I'm an advocate of homeschooling simply because I experienced the products of homeschooling, and they impressed me. And they still impress me to this day. At Anderson University, my best university students are the homeschool graduates. Okay, so we're talking about homeschooling through high school, and you might ask yourself, can I teach high school? And the answer is, of course not. You've got to be kidding. I can't teach high school. I can teach high school science. I can take a pretty good stab at teaching high school math, but that's it. I can't teach high school English, high school geography, that kind of stuff. No, no one can teach high school, because to be a teacher, you have to be an expert. Now, it's more than that. I know a lot of experts who can't teach. But to be a teacher, you have to be an expert. If you don't know the subject, there's no way you're teaching it. So just like you might not feel like you can teach high school science, I certainly can't teach high school English or high school literature or anything like that. But you shouldn't be doing that. As a homeschooler, your job is not to teach, especially not at the high school level. And so this is the most important part of the talk. You can log off after this if you want. No problem. But the main thing you have to focus on is that as your student gets older, your role changes. Initially, you are your student's teacher because your student knows nothing. And even if you send your child to school, you're your child's first teacher, right? You teach them how to dress themselves, how to use the toilet, all that kind of stuff. You're the teacher because your child knows next to nothing. Hopefully, you're an expert in these things so you can teach it. And if you start homeschooling, you're teaching them basic writing, basic reading, basic math. Once again, between you and your spouse, hopefully you're experts in that. However, the reason you're giving them this knowledge, teaching them to read, teaching them to write, teaching them basic math, is because these are the tools that you use to educate yourself. And so as your child gets older, you need to back away from being a teacher and just be more of a tutor. I've given you the skills to learn on your own. Now it's time to put those skills to practice. Now, I'll come in and help you when you get stuck, and I'll crack the whip to make sure you're not being lazy. But in general, you should be putting more emphasis on your child learning on his or her own as your child gets older. Now, usually this happens very naturally because as your oldest children get older, you have to spend more time with the younger children who are in the process of getting older, right? But this has to happen because in the end, the whole reason you want them to be able to read, write, and do math is so they can teach themselves beyond what your knowledge base is. And so you start them off like that when you can still help them. And then at some point, you stop even being the tutor, and you're just the other person reading that same paragraph 700 times to try and figure out what it means, right? You're just the person learning right along with them. And if you don't have time to do this because you're dealing with younger kids, you've got to find someone who can. Another adult, a very responsible peer, something like that. You've got to find somebody to just learn right along with your student. And honestly, if I think about what's the main reason my university students that are homeschool graduates are my best students, it's because they've already spent a lot of time doing this. They've already spent a lot of time learning without the benefit of a teacher. And at university, there are some things you just have to learn on your own. I don't have time to cover everything that I need you to know. So in the end, I cover the rough stuff. You have to get the basic stuff on your own. The more experience you've had doing that already, the better university student you will be. And then, of course, the better you will be no matter what you do later on in life, right? Maybe you don't go to university at all, but as soon as you go into the workforce, if you can learn by picking up those instruction manuals and reading them on your own, in the end, you're going to be farther ahead than all these other people who have to be sent to the company's training program and all that nonsense. So in the end, if you're not doing this, if you're not having the student shoulder more burden and then eventually having the student really learning on his or her own just with the help of a friend or your help, in the end, you're not taking advantage of the power of the homeschooling model. So the question isn't, can you teach high school? The question is, can you help your child learn at the high school level? And the answer to that is absolutely yes, you can. And that's what your job is as a homeschooler, is to help your child learn. Not necessarily to teach, but to help your child learn. And quite frankly, remember, the only thing you have to do to help your child learn is learn right along with them. And if your children can learn it, you can too. Now you might say, hey, wait a minute, my children are a lot smarter than I am. I completely understand. I have students who are a lot smarter than I am. In one talk, I talk about this high school student who corrected me after class, a big mistake I made about something. And it turned out I was just parroting what other people said. And it turned out what other people said was wrong too. And so this high school student and I did some research over the summer, and we figured out the actual explanation. But it was all because she is much smarter than me. And so I've got students who are much smarter than me. However, I've got something they don't, and that's experience. And experience always trumps raw talent. So in the end, yes, your children may be smarter than you, but you have the benefit of your experience. You'll be able to learn whatever you're expecting them to learn. And learning independently is the most productive kind of learning you can do. If it were possible to teach absolutely no content throughout all 12 years of school, but just give them the ability to learn on their own, they're already ahead of most of their peers. Because what you know is not nearly as important as the skill of figuring out how to know more, right? And the fact is, lots of other people have been doing this for a long time. And in fact, it's been more difficult for them than it is for you. And so if they can do it, you can too. So I told you that when I first started experiencing homeschool students, homeschool graduates, and realizing how good my homeschool graduates were, I wanted to look in the academic literature to see if this was common. These are some of the first studies I ran into. So these are studies that were published in the early 90s. They were probably of students who were being homeschooled in the late 80s, because it takes time to compile data and publish the paper and everything. So this is the results of Stanford Achievement Test. Now that has the abbreviation SAT, but it's not the SAT. That's something else. The Stanford Achievement Tests are grade level standardized tests we use simply to gauge how much the student knows about given subjects. This is only for high school, grades 9 through 12. The Stanford Achievement Test, like most standardized tests for high school, are scored so that every year the average is 50%. So this blue line is the average of the nation. Here's how homeschoolers do on that same test. In reading and language and a basic battery, which is a little bit of everything, homeschoolers are more than 20% above the mean. Now in math, they're only about 15% above the mean. So their worst subject is still much higher than the national average. But nevertheless, on all subjects, the average homeschooled student is superior to the average publicly and privately schooled student. And you can look at it as averages and see that the homeschooled students really excel, but you could ask a different question. This is the average of the nation. These are the average homeschoolers. Let's ask this. What percentage of homeschoolers score at least at the average? So what percentage of homeschoolers score at least 50% on these standardized tests? The numbers change depending on the study, but generally about 90%. About 90% of homeschoolers score at least the national average. So let's suppose you're a rotten homeschooler, and let's suppose you're giving your child a rotten homeschool experience. Well, what's that going to do to his or her scores? It's going to lower them. And if you're really, really bad, it might lower them all the way to 50%, at which point you're on par with the national average. So here's the, if we really believe these studies, and I do, I think these studies are legitimate, then in the end, as long as you stay out of the bottom 10% of homeschool, as long as you're up there with 90% of all other homeschoolers, you're going to give your child at least an equivalent education to the public schools. That's not a high bar. But nevertheless, you really, really have to be a bad homeschooler to even be equal to the national average, much less below. So homeschoolers do really, really well. There's one reason I kept these data old. I mean, I've seen lots and lots of data since, and all the data agree. Homeschooled students are better educated on average, well, much better educated on average. These are old data, and I kept these for a reason. Like I said, these are students who were probably being homeschooled in the late 80s, early 90s at the very latest. Think about how homeschooling has changed since then. You think homeschooling is easier now or harder? Now, homeschooling is not easy, but it's clearly easier today than it was for the people who are making up this study. There are more support groups, more curriculum designed specifically for homeschoolers, more. you've got more resources than the people who made up this study. So if they can do that well, you can do even better. And in fact, we see that. If I look at how the distance between homeschoolers and everybody else has changed over the course of 30 years, the distance between homeschoolers and everybody else has gotten greater. Homeschoolers are even more superior now than they were 30 years ago. And I think it's because even though homeschooling is not easy, it's easier now than it was back then. So anyway, you can do this. Lots of other people have with much fewer resources than you have. All right. Also, if you're worried about whether you know enough to teach at the high school level, I hear that a lot. I mean, wow, yeah, you could homeschool your kid. You have a PhD. I have a PhD in nuclear chemistry. I don't have a PhD in English, history, and all that kind of stuff, right? So if you're worried, do you have enough knowledge to teach your child? Turns out it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. There have been several studies like this. Once again, this is older study because you figure it was harder back then than it is today. We can look at newer studies that say exactly the same thing. If I look at how homeschoolers do on the standardized test, this is grades K through 12, and it's all subjects and everything. But if you look, the blue bars represent the average homeschool performance. And you can see it's very, very high and almost independent of the parent's education level. This is specifically the mother. You can make a similar graph for the father, but the mother's usually the one in charge of homeschooling, so we do this for the mother. So here are the homeschool students whose mothers are college grads. They had some college, never graduated, graduated high school, never went to college, dropped out of high school. Notice that the bars are virtually the same height. There's a little bit of dependence. And if you really believe it, it looks like the high school dropouts are doing just a little better at homeschooling than high school grads. Actually, I think this is all statistical fluctuation. I think what these data are saying is it's really independent of parent education level. But notice what you see with the public schools. The public schools, there's a direct relationship. The more education the mother has, the better the student does. Now, why is that? I mean, these public school students, they're being taught by expert teachers who know the subject. And these homeschoolers just have their dumb old parents. How in the world are they doing better and more consistently than the expert teachers? Now, I don't think you can find the exact answer to this, but I think the explanation that I like the most, that I've heard from people who think about this a lot more deeply than I do, is what you're really looking at here is simply a scale of parental involvement. Lots of studies show the more education the mother is, the more involved she will be in her child's public or private education. Well, there's no involvement that tops homeschooling. That's maximum parental involvement. So that's why the blue bars are so high and don't depend much on the mother's education level. So the question isn't, are you knowledgeable enough to teach your children or to help your children learn? The question is, are you involved enough? That seems to be the issue. Also, if you're worried about whether you can afford all that great curriculum that's out there, that doesn't seem to matter either. Whether you make a very low income or a very high income, homeschoolers score about the same on these standardized tests. I don't have this data for the public and private schools, but I seriously doubt it looks like this. Once again, I expect a direct correlation. The more money the parents have, the better the students do in public and private school. And there's probably even a higher level for private school. But nevertheless, none of them, neither public nor private, are going to show this kind of consistency across income level. Because in the end, once again, it's not how much money you've got, it's how involved you're going to be. So others have done this, others have done it with fewer resources than you have. So you can definitely do this. Now you might wonder what happens after graduation. Now there's a lot more to graduation than college. And I'm gonna do a few things on college, but then I'm gonna focus on other things as well. Please understand, I am not telling you that your child should go to college just by talking about how homeschoolers do at the college level. Honestly, as a university professor, I'm telling you there are far too many kids in college right now. Too many parents think that college is just the next step. And as a result, I've got a whole bunch of kids in my college classes who shouldn't be there at all. And not only are they wasting their time and their parents' money, they're also distracting the kids who should be there. and they're pulling the bar down. Because in the end, if you just look at what any university covers now compared to 20 years ago, you'll see the university covers less in every subject. Because in the end, the bar has been pulled down by the students who shouldn't be there to begin with. So I am not telling you your child should go to college. In fact, let me tell you, there are only two reasons to go to college. One is if your child's just a natural born scholar. If your child would rather read nonfiction than play Nintendo, yes, he or she should go to university because scholars belong there. The only other reason you go to university is if you have a career path in mind that requires a university degree. If you're going to be a doctor's lawyer, you need to go to college. If you're going to be a lawyer's doctor, you need to go to college, right? So if you've got a career path in mind that requires the degree, then obviously go to college. But if you don't have that career path and aren't a natural scholar, you are wasting your time and your parents' money in college, and you're distracting the kids who should be there. However, college is one way we can measure the effectiveness of high school. And there are a lot of studies that have done this. I'm going to talk about a few of them. This is my favorite study. It comes from the University of St. Thomas, Roman Catholic University. And so because they're Roman Catholic, they split their incoming students up into 4 categories: public school graduates, Catholic school graduates, private non-Catholic school graduates, and homeschool graduates. They looked at lots of things in this study, but these are the 3 I think are most relevant. The first year grade point average. This, I think, is the best measure of how well prepared these students are for college based on their high school. And notice that public, Catholic, and private are all about the same. Now remember, this is for a particular campus. And the fact that they're the same, you don't expect that. You expect, on average, publicly schooled students to be slightly less prepared than private and maybe Catholic, I don't know, but private school students. However, the fact that they're nearly equal tells me that the University of St. Thomas has a really good admissions policy. Whatever policy they're making to determine can their incoming students succeed, they're doing a really good job because they're pulling equivalent people from public, Catholic, and private school. But those same standards pull a much higher level from the homeschool students. And after 4 years, now at this point, students have adapted. Their high school education isn't nearly as important as it was for first year. So after 4 years, you see the other 3 types of students have partially caught up to the homeschool students. The difference between home and everybody else isn't quite as great now. But nevertheless, these kids can't completely catch up. In the end, the homeschoolers still excel. And then, of course, one measure is what their likelihood to graduate in 4 years is. I wanted my daughter to graduate in 4 years. It took her 5. We called that 5th year her victory lap. But anyway, most parents would like to see their kids graduate in 4. And you can see the homeschoolers are significantly more likely to do that. Interestingly enough, the public school graduates are the next. I would not expect that. I would expect the Catholic students to be next, and probably the private ones after that, and then the public ones. But that's not what happens. But nevertheless, in each case, the homeschooled students are measurably superior to their colleagues, their peers. Now, this is exactly what I saw with my homeschool graduates. There was everybody else, and then the homeschoolers. That's what I saw. And that's why I like this study. It really graphically shows just how the homeschool students compare to everyone else. There are a lot of other schools that have looked at grade point average, and they've looked at their homeschool graduates and compared it to everybody else on campus. Boston University did a study. It was actually a 6-year study. So they caught more than just one group of college students. It was over 6 years. Their homeschool graduates had a solid B. Everybody else a C+. Right? So in the end, the homeschool graduates were significantly measurably better. Baylor University is a Christian school in some ways. It's mostly secular. It started out Christian. It's mostly secular these days. But once again, their homeschool graduates have a higher GPA than everybody else. Ave Maria University is a Roman Catholic university, so once again, they group a little differently. Their homeschool graduates are better than everybody else. Their publicly schooled graduates are a little lower than their, actually this is public and private non-Catholic, and this is the Catholic school graduates. So the Catholic school graduates are where you expect them to be, a little bit better than everybody else. but the homeschool graduates are immeasurably superior to everyone else. And this not only happens at university, it happens where there are really no admission standards. So York Technical College is a place you can go to prove yourself. It's a place you can go to get a college education if you can't afford a higher level university, or if you kind of were a ne'er-do-well in high school and you want to prove yourself now that you're older and more serious and so forth, you go to a technical college. Once again, homeschool graduates who go to this technical college, measurably superior to everyone else. Why is that? Well, there have been, like I said, I think it's mostly because they're used to learning on their own. But there are other people who say other things. Stanford University, who's never published their numbers, as far as I know, I've never seen them, but they regularly accept about twice the percentage of their homeschool applicant pool as everyone else. So you have like, say, I think it's about a 10% chance of getting into Stanford University if you go to public or private school. It's 20% chance if you're a homeschool graduate, because they recognize that homeschool graduates are better. And most universities are like that these days. There are some people who hold out for ideological reasons, but most universities simply want the best students. And as a result, the higher the level of the university, the more likely a homeschool transcript is to help your student get in, because most universities accept a higher percentage of their homeschool applicant pool. Stanford University has been doing this for a long time. And Jonathan Ryder used to be the head of the Stanford admissions department. I'm not sure if he even works there anymore. But when he was interviewed, why is it Stanford loves homeschool graduates? He said this: the distinguishing factor is intellectual vitality. Homeschooled kids have it, and everything they do is responding to it. And I really agree, intellectual vitality. They're really interested in learning. And if you want to know why that's so odd today, all you have to do is go to a public or private school where the desire to learn gets socialized out of you by your peers. Your peers punish you if you do well in school. So you have an incentive to not be intellectually vital. In homeschool, you don't have that. Parents want their kids to be intellectually vital. They encourage it. And so it is intellectual vitality. I absolutely agree. There's something about homeschooling that produces that, whereas publicly and privately schooled students tend to have that socialized out of them. All right. There was also a study done of high school graduates from ages 18 to 24. It turns out there's this survey that's done every year of high school graduates throughout the nation, randomly selected high school graduates throughout the nation. And a whole bunch of data are collected on these kids to show every year what's going on with high school graduates. Well, a researcher decided to give that same exact study to homeschool graduates. So he limited to homeschool graduates age 18 to 24, and then he limited the results of the standard study to only 18 to 24 as well. So we've got two groups of people who have graduated high school, but they're all between 18 and 24. One group is graduated from homeschool, the other group from public or private school. If you just ask by this time, how many have a bachelor's degree, how many have an associate's degree, how many are in college working towards a degree, you can see in each category, homeschoolers are superior. There are more homeschoolers with degrees or working towards a college degree than the rest of the population of the same age. Now, once again, I'm not telling you everyone should go to college. I'm in fact telling you quite the opposite. Not everyone should go to college. In fact, there are too many people in college right now. But if you're worried about whether homeschooling is going to affect your child's performance at college, obviously that's not the case. All right? A couple of things that are really interesting that go beyond college or whatever is just a bunch of yes or no questions. Now, remember, this is a standardized survey. It's done every year to publicly and privately schooled graduates across the nation. And then it was done this one time with homeschool graduates as well. And so they have to answer these questions, yes or no. Here's one question. Have you read a book in English in the past 6 months? So these are students who have graduated. Some have gone on to college, so they're probably reading books, but some of them have not. Homeschool graduates, 98.5% said yes. Everybody else, same age, 69%. So homeschoolers are more likely to be reading past the time it's required. Do you volunteer in an ongoing community service? Homeschoolers, 71.1%. Rest of the population, 37%. So if you're a homeschool graduate, you're almost twice as likely to be a volunteer in a community service. So you recognize how important it is to help your fellow people, right? And you're more likely to do that as a homeschool grad than a public or privately schooled grad. This is a question that if I were asked it, I would be insulted. Are politics and government too complicated to understand? Less than 5% of homeschool graduates said yes. Here's the scary number. 35% of everybody else, age 18 to 24, said yes. And I guarantee you, nearly every one of them voted. But clearly, homeschooled students are not only more involved in their community, they are more engaged in their civics than everybody else. Have you used a public library in the past year? People think with the internet these days, there's no reason to go to the library. There's lots of reasons to go to the library. Lots of stuff there you're not going to find on the internet. And lots of stuff you get just by browsing that you're going to get by browsing shelves and not browsing with your internet browser. Homeschool graduates, more than 90%. Rest of the population, just over half. So in the end, homeschoolers tend to be learning more after they're required. They tend to be giving back to their community, and they tend to be more engaged civically. This is all what you want if your goal is to produce a well-educated population. Now, one thing we can do is ask some questions specific to homeschoolers. So this same study, now we're not comparing them to everybody else. We're just looking at these homeschool graduates. And there were like 5,000 in these studies. This is a really, really good number of students. So they were given a bunch of statements, and they were asked, do you strongly agree, agree, strongly disagree, disagree, or neither, right? So here's the first statement. I'm glad that I was homeschooled. My daughter, when she was being homeschooled, would have said strongly disagree. I have a whole talk about that too, about what it's like to homeschool a child who doesn't want to be homeschooled. However, shortly after going to university, she called us and asked, I answered the phone. She said, put Mom on the other line too. And she always did that when she wanted to talk to us. But then on that call, she actually thanked us for homeschooling. She said, I hated it the whole time, but now that I'm here, I can see why you did it, and I'm really, really glad you did. So nowadays, she's in the strongly agree column. But while she was being homeschooled, she was in the strongly disagree column. Who joins her? Well, between strongly agree and just agree, we get the vast majority. We get more than 90% of the homeschoolers strongly agree with that statement. Only 2% strongly agree or disagree. And then there are a few who can't make up their mind. So in the end, the vast majority of homeschoolers are glad they were homeschooled. But now let's ask a slightly different question. Having been homeschooled was an advantage. I could be glad I was homeschooled because I got to stay in my pajamas all day. Only had to take a shower once a week or something like that. So glad I'm homeschooled is different from now that I'm a graduate, I can see it was an advantage. The numbers change, but we still have more than 90% agreeing or strongly agreeing with that statement. We have less than 2% disagreeing or strongly disagreeing. And remember, this is 5,000 students. And so a change of 0.1%, maybe that's a big deal. It's only 5 students, but think about this. There were 5 students who weren't glad they were homeschooled, but at least didn't see it as a disadvantage. I find that very interesting. And there were a few more now that can't make up their mind. Now here's where the rubber meets the road. I would homeschool my own children. What do you think about it? What do you think your children will say when they graduate? Well, once again, the numbers change, and we don't quite reach 90% this time, but over 80% of homeschool graduates would homeschool their own children. A fewer, a bit higher percentage would not. This was 2%. Now we're a little bit above that. There's a lot more in the neither column, and I could imagine since this is 18 to 24, a lot of them probably haven't even thought about kids yet. So maybe that's why this number is so big. But anyway, even talking about something that hasn't happened yet, whether I'll homeschool my own children, the vast majority say yes. Now, I want you to think about these numbers for a minute. Think about those statements and think about these numbers. And imagine if I gave this to every private school in the nation. Do you think any private school could come up with these numbers? I mean, I'm sure there are some schools where the almost everybody gets into college, almost everybody becomes a lawyer's doctor or a doctor's lawyer or something like that. Very successful private schools. But do you think more than 90% of their graduates were glad they were there? More than 90% see its advantage, and more than 80% would send their own kids there? I can't imagine any private school or public school in the nation that can boast that kind of reception. But that's what homeschooling gives you. And honestly, that shouldn't be surprising. I know it probably is surprising to you, but it shouldn't be surprising, because what is homeschooling predominantly? It is being taught by people who love you in a tailored way that matches your needs. Of course, people are going to be very happy with the results. On balance, obviously, there are going to be a few people it doesn't work for. But the vast majority of people are going to be very, very happy with the results, because that's the nature of a good education, done in the context of love and done tailored to the student's needs. All right? A couple other things from this same study. Taken all together, how would you say things are these days? Would you say that you are very happy, pretty happy, or not too happy? Obviously, here's where I want my daughter to be, right? And obviously, these numbers I sure would change depending on the day the student took the survey. Nevertheless, homeschooled students are significantly more likely to say very happy and significantly less likely to say not too happy. So in the end, homeschooling seems to produce more well-adjusted adults. Now, these are all really nice statistics, and statistics are important because it's not just we've got a few homeschool success stories. The fact is the vast majority of homeschoolers are homeschool success stories, right? And that's what's important about statistics. But obviously, these students are people, and you can make specific observations about what kind of people they are. So when I think about my homeschool graduates at the university level, the very first thing I think of is they're much more eager to learn. Now, it's not that they come to class 15 minutes early in a three-piece suit and sit in the front row. No. But they're there on time, and they're engaged in class. And they're more likely to ask questions, and they're more likely to see me at my office hours. That's what I notice about my homeschool graduates. And once again, they sought me out for help and additional instruction. And like I said, I told you, one of the things that really sticks in my mind is that kid asking me, I don't even remember his name, but I remember him asking me about the Gibbs free energy equation, because that's the kind of stuff that stands out. And I think about that more with homeschool graduates than anybody else. Also, there's something I do to science majors. You know, I teach a whole range of science courses, and some of them are for non-science majors. So we have this chemistry class we lovingly call Chemistry for Poets. And it's a science class that you can use to fulfill your general education science requirement. So if you want to be a poet, you can take this chemistry course and use it as one of your science requirements. And I would never do that with those students. But for students who are going on in the sciences, I want to see how well they think. So I always ask one question on the test that is unlike anything I've covered in class. Now, if you understand the reading, you understand the material, you should be able to figure out what the question's asking and at least how to approach it. But I've never solved a problem like this in class. This is something you have to apply the knowledge you learn to figure out. Time and time again, most of my students simply don't answer the question. And when I ask them why, the answer is, you didn't teach it to me. What I noticed is the people I recognized as homeschool grads, they tried to answer that question every time because they were used to trying to figure it out. This wasn't something new to them. Also, they were more mature when it came to taking responsibility for their own learning. And the best way you can see that is they actually read the book. And in science, that is so rare. But nevertheless, once again, these students I recognized as homeschool graduates, they showed me they had read the book by the questions they asked, by the highlights that were in their book, that kind of thing. So in the end, these homeschool graduates were much more responsible for their own education. Now, once again, these were my observations at the university level. But there are a lot of homeschoolers who go into the workforce right away, and not surprisingly, they excel there as well. Andy Lorenzen is a Chick-fil-A recruiter, and he's recruiting managers, for the restaurants. And says he specifically looks for homeschool graduates. Doesn't care if they have a college degree or not. He looks for homeschool graduates because, quote, they're smart, ambitious, and very driven. They have a high level of loyalty to the business, are diligent, and have a good work ethic. Exactly what you want. Dr. Gary Knowles is actually in Canada. He did his PhD work in Michigan, state of Michigan, I think at the University of Michigan, and he specifically studied homeschooled graduates and said that they are superior academically. But now he's running the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education, and he talks about homeschool graduates as, quote, they're well versed in basic business principles. They have the discipline to either run their own business or become quite focused employees. HR Magazine is the trade journal for people who hire other people for a living. And every now and again, they'll do an article on why you should attract homeschool graduates to your place of business, whatever place of business that is. And one of them said this: their work ethic and personal qualities make an unbeatable combination. And that's really true. Now, Andy Lorenzen ended up recruiting Joe Jeffcoat, who is a manager at Chick-fil-A. He says he specifically tries to hire homeschool kids who are still being homeschooled as the part-time help, the behind-the-counter help and everything. Because, quote, they have a good sense of humor and know how to act. Lots of kids have trouble with judgment, differentiating what's appropriate behavior in the work environment and on the ball field. Not these kids. But hands down, my favorite evaluation of homeschool graduates comes from Patricia Lines. She used to work for the Department of Education, so she knows what graduates are like. And she says this: if I didn't know anything about someone other than their educational background, I'd rather hop into a foxhole with a homeschool kid than one from public school. The homeschool kid will be a little better educated and dependent. And I agree with that as well. So whether you're talking about university, the workplace, or apparently foxholes, homeschool graduates simply do a better job. All right? Now, I have concentrated mostly on the outcomes of homeschooling at the high school level because that's what everybody's worried about. But I want to finish by summing up the full case for why you should homeschool through high school. Number one, it is your responsibility to train your children. You're the one who's answering to God for this, not their third grade English teacher, right? So in the end, you are supposed to train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. So in the end, if you aren't taking an incredibly aggressively active role in your child's education, it may not be homeschooling, but you are supposed to be training up your child. If you're not doing that, then in fact, you're disobeying Scripture. All right? Also, no matter what kind of school you send your child to, you are putting them in an environment with an uncontrolled peer group and an uncontrolled faculty. And you just never know what horrors might be injected into your kid because of that. I don't know if you know that. I just wrote an article about this. Did you know that at least 10% of kids who get sent to public school report being sexually abused at public school? Usually by a faculty member, but sometimes by a peer. 10%, 1 in 10. And that number is probably low because these are simply the reported ones, all right? And schools do a lot to try and cover this kind of stuff up. You want to avoid these negative role models. And if you think sending them to a Christian school will fix that, I would like you to listen to Dr. Fred Worth. He's a mathematician, but one of the things he does is he uses mathematical models to validate surveys. Because supposedly you can do these mathematical models that can tell you whether or not a survey is a reasonable survey and whether or not the respondents are being honest. Because if you ask the same question 17 different ways and you correlate their answers, you can determine whether they're being honest or not. So he did this for a long time. He finally started writing his own surveys. And one thing he did was he wrote a moral survey and sent it to both public and private schools. And simply asked, when's the last time you had sex? Have you ever gotten pregnant, had an abortion? Do you think it's okay to cheat on a test if nobody catches you? When's the last time you stole something from a store? That kind of stuff. And then he compares public school student answers to Christian school student answers. And here's what he says, quote, Let me clearly say that this is one area where my observations show virtually no difference between Christian schools and government schools. The same peer attitudes show up among Christian school children as those in government school. So in the end, you're not exposing your kids to a better peer group by sending them off to a private Christian school. You're not. At least not according to Dr. Fred Worth's research. And in fact, it's still uncontrolled because you're not there to control it, right? Also, you want to avoid the situation where you teach your child Christianity, but the school teaches something different every day of the week, 8 hours a day. And once again, if you think, okay, Christian school takes care of that, it only partially takes care of that. Because generally the teachers teach what they believe. And if what they believe aligns with what you believe, great. But I guarantee you, not every teacher's like that, even in a Christian school. Even in a Christian school, the same denomination as you. All right? You want to keep your child safe from bullies, teasers, and worse. Not going to have nearly as much of that at home as you do in a private or public school. Strengthen your family while emphasizing the importance of education. This has become the most important thing to me. Like I said, when we started homeschooling my daughter, it was purely for academics. She wanted to go to university. I personally didn't think she should go to university, but she had emotional reasons for going to university. None of her bloodline, as far as she knew, ever graduated from university, so she thought maybe, and my wife, her mom, and me both go to college. So she thought maybe went to college, got a college degree. So she thought maybe getting a college degree would make her more like us than more like them. And I thought that was silly, but my wife, who's much more wise than I am, said, let her do this. It's important. So we did. And she wanted to go to university, but I knew she would never, ever succeed with her level of education. So we homeschooled her primarily in order to get her ready for university. But once she was all done, we realized that was simply a side benefit. The real reason we homeschooled her was to get to know her. And that's what Fred Worth says. Once again, same fellow I quoted earlier. Children sent to government school are told their education is important, but are then packed off to get that experience from strangers. Homeschooled children are told that their education is important and then see that it is important by having their parents take a central role in the obtaining of that education. That reinforces the importance of the educational experience and strengthens familial relationships. And that is so true. It's not just quality time. It's quantity time. I know my daughter so much better because we homeschooled her. And I was the one who was principally involved in the homeschooling because my schedule was more flexible than my wife's. And I know her so much better. If I had packed her off to get her education from strangers, I wouldn't know her nearly as well. Homeschooling is not a magic recipe for anything. It's not a magic recipe for great education. It's not a magic recipe for great family relationships. But your child's significantly more likely to get a better education as a homeschooler, and you're significantly more likely to have strong familial relationships if you're a homeschooler. So once again, significantly more likely to get a better education as a homeschooler. Also, your student will be properly socialized. I touched on this a little bit. Intellectual vitality of homeschool graduates comes from the fact that the love of learning is not socialized out of them. Lots of bad things are socialized into them, and lots of good things are socialized out of them in school. Because in the end, who are they mostly spending time with? They're mostly spending time with their peer group. And the peer group is a horrible teacher in every possible scenario. So in the end, if you want your child properly socialized, socialize them with people who you know very well and who you know have a good sense of what's proper from a social perspective. And I guarantee you, it's significantly more likely that your student will be better prepared for college, the workforce, or life in general. But if you really want to know, I want to quote from you from a real share a quote with you from a real expert. This is a homeschool graduate. It's not my daughter. I don't even know her. I know her mother. So this person was graduating homeschool and wanted to do something unique. I have a whole talk where I talk about homeschoolers and what they're doing now. And that's one thing I see. Homeschoolers often do something very unique as a part of their career path. So she wanted to do something very different. So she, in her senior year, took out ads in international English-speaking papers. So like in the UK and Australia and South Africa and so forth. offering her services as a nanny. She wanted to be a live-in nanny in a foreign country, to have an experience like that. I think that's really cool that you want to have an experience like that as a kid. I wish I'd have had experiences like that as a kid. And be a kid, I mean, right out of high school. And so she ended up getting hired by a family in the UK. And so she went over there, lived with them, raised their kids. Back then, it wasn't as easy to do Skype and that kind of stuff. So most of the correspondence between her and her mother was email. And so her mother was telling her about this friend she had whose son wanted to go to school. He had been homeschooled all the way, and now it's high school. He wants to go to school. So this young woman who's living in the UK, raising somebody else's kids, says, give me his email address. I want to write him. And she copied her mother on what she wrote, the kid. And this is a portion of what she wrote. So everything here in blue comes as an excerpt from that email. She's trying to convince this guy that he should stay in homeschool. Here's part of what she said. I came out of homeschool with the desire to learn even more, with an awesome relationship with God, with strong relationships with my family. You'll realize how important that really is. With more maturity than my peers, with solid character, strong morals, values, and standards, and with true friendships. I think that by homeschooling, I was able to escape the superficiality that's so predominant in the public school scene. That's that part about good things being socialized out of you and bad things being socialized into you. Superficiality, socialized into you. Going back to this wise woman's words. And build on the areas and friends that would and have lasted. I am so blessed to have the parents I have. Not many are willing to give up their time so their kids can have the ultimate experience in education. And I have many friends who wished theirs would have. Don't take it for granted. It's one of the greatest gifts you'll ever receive. Now, I am not telling you that when your child graduates, he or she's going to write a letter like this to somebody. No. But I'm saying if I want to know what I want my daughter to have by the time she graduates, it's the bold-faced type right there. Awesome relationship with God, no superficiality, and understanding the gifts you've been given. That's what I want my daughter to have. You're more likely to have that if you homeschool. So this is why you homeschool through high school. Now, if you have any questions, this is a recording, so you can't ask me. However, if you go to my publisher site, BereanBuilders.com, there is a place you can contact my publisher. If he can answer the question, if they can answer the question, they will. If not, they're going to send it to me, and I'll answer. If you have any of my curriculum that published through Berean Builders, in the introduction to the book, which many people skip, never skip the introduction to any textbook. In the introduction to the book, there's a website you can go to ask me questions directly. If you've bought any of my curriculum from Berean Builders, use that. That cuts out the middle person. So in the end, go to the introduction of the book, find that website, contact me. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. God bless you, and may your homeschool journey be as wonderful as mine was. It wasn't perfect. We had a lot of non-precious moments. But in the end, what I see in my daughter now, I am so glad that I homeschooled.
Okay. Well, that's pretty awesome. I hadn't seen that particular version of it. It pretty much goes over some of the same data that I had when he gave his presentation at the homeschool conference. I think he had more statistics there, some more HSLDA statistics, and I think he went over things like different kinds of curriculum that you used, and they still did so much better. It didn't matter which curriculum they used, didn't matter how much they spent, and there was I think he went over education of the father, education of the mother. It was just a lot more statistics, but you get the point. The details don't really matter. He said, I'm going to really highlight the part we talked about. If you're a crappy homeschooler, if you do this and you suck at it, as long as you're not in the lowest 10%, your kids are going to at least do as well as public school kids do. And you get all those other benefits, that you have a better relationship with your kids. And so I think that's great. But I wanted to answer any questions. If you guys have questions about it, I saw some neat ones in the chat. Asher's out mowing, so that's where some of the noise is coming from. But yeah, I saw that if you homeschool, can you get into college because it's not accredited, and that's a very common question. And yeah, actually there's no accreditation necessary for any of that stuff. In fact, most colleges, when they see homeschool application, they immediately will pull it to the front because there's a much higher percentage chance that that kid will graduate and do well. And of course, all those statistics are looked upon by parents who are wanting to take their kids to schools. And so if they have a high graduation rate, the kids that graduate do better, they're going to look better, and they're going to therefore get more money. So that's really important to them, to get people that are going to graduate. That's what they care about most. And homeschoolers immediately say that. There's no kind of thing in the applying for colleges says, did you graduate from an accredited high school? You know, that's not a question that'll ever happen or ever come up. So you have to provide records, and so you have to make a report card for your kids, and you just print something up on your computer and log all the things that they did as they do them. But that's about it. So. Can we do a video specific about ACE? Andrea's got several ACE videos in our in the channel, so you can go there and check out all kinds of stuff there. We might possibly do one. I'm very good at teaching ACE and showing the ins and outs of how it works. I am terrible at ordering the stuff. April's been helping me, thankfully, on figuring out what paces I need to order, what, you know, that kind of a thing. But after that, as far as how it works, I can certainly do some videos on that. So anybody have any more questions? Any silver linings to the pandemic, reevaluation of our kids in the homeschool? Absolutely, I totally agree. Is Thomas delaying college until he finishes? Thomas doesn't have a desire or a draw to go to college. So he'd like to someday work his way to be the owner of the grocery store he works at, and I think that's a fine goal. So that's not something we're pushing. And if you catch the beginning of this video, he said basically the same thing I've been telling you guys for forever, and that unless your kid is, he said, unless they're a very, very scholarly kid, if they'd rather read a book or study than play Nintendo, then they should go to college. Or if they're going to be a lawyer or a doctor or have a career they need to do it, then they should go. And he said that if not, you shouldn't go. That's his words, not mine, although I have said things very similar, you guys know. So what Bible version did ACE use? They use the King James Version. They use the King James Version. That's, to me, I don't like that, but it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Andrew's Christmas video got me up in check when it came last year when it's time to shop. Well, good. I probably need to watch it myself. Can your kids finish their work by noon? Asher can, and they can if they want to. That comes back to a drive, which is why I think our privilege system works. When I was teaching at the Christian school, I was administrator of a Christian school here in town that used ACE. And that's where the privilege system came from. We had the ACE, they had 3 privilege levels: privilege level A, privilege level C, privilege level E. And like on E, they didn't have to wait for a teacher to get out of their chair. They could get out of the chair whenever they wanted, whereas opposed to they only had to ask. They could go to the bathroom whenever they want. They could play the computer games when they're done, even at school. And it was a very neat thing. And so we do that same thing in our house. On E privilege, they can play computer games whenever they want. They don't even have to be done with school. But of course, in order to maintain an E privilege status, you have to finish so much school. And so if they just play video games for a week and don't get school done, then they will lose that very, very shortly. But having those types of things, so it's like if the kids want to play more computer, or you can put all kinds of different things on the privilege level system, they can get their work done really fast, and that is more of an incentive. Like I'm gonna stay up until, like, especially if they're really close to getting privilege. I just need to do a couple more pages and I get privilege justice. Especially, I'm gonna get up at 6 a.m. and I'm gonna finish all my school. And you'll get up at 6 in the morning where everybody else is still sleeping, and you'll do his school. And so yeah, you can get done by noon if you want to. It all depends on how together you are. That was one of the stats that I wish was in this one, was the one about the curriculum. It doesn't matter which curriculum you use. It doesn't matter. Is one going to be slightly better than the other? Maybe on some things. Like I said before, I always heard Abeka math was supposed to be better than the other math, and blah, blah, blah. But we're talking about small percentage points. As a general rule, the kids are going to still do great. In my opinion, the most important homeschool decision you will ever make is not which curriculum you will use. It's whether or not you quit homeschooling. So if you quit homeschooling, you lose all the benefits of the things you talked about in the video. You lose all the benefits of being a homeschool family. And so in my opinion, the curriculum that is best is the one that makes it the easiest on parents. And so anything that's going to make it easy on you as a mom is going to make you more likely to stick with it, and you're going to get all those benefits. It also keeps you from going crazy. So keeping the mom from going crazy is priority number one when it comes to homeschooling. So that's where ACE is stupendous. The kids score their own work, they grade their own work, they're responsible for setting their own goals and finishing their work, and you basically are there to answer questions, help them not to cheat, and to test them. And it's a lot easier to do it, especially if you have lots of different grades at the same time. It really isn't any different having lots of different grades. If you have little kids learning to read, then it's very challenging. That's where Grandma Kitty's helping us out. But it's not any different. All the kids can be right next to a high schooler, right next to a fifth grader, and that's fine. They ask you different questions, but the procedure isn't any different. You're not up there lecturing. You're just, like he said, I really love that part about how you don't have to know the stuff. You just need to be able to learn it with them. And plus, that puts the kid on your level. If you don't understand something, and they say, well, I don't understand this, and you read it and you think, I don't understand this, well, let's go back and read what it says. Let's follow on together. You figure it out together. That builds a bond with your kids that I can't explain. It is very powerful. And those concepts that you do that with, they remember forever. They'll remember the time when, remember, you didn't know that either, Mom? And I say, yeah, I remember that, but we figured it out, didn't we? Yep, and it's something we did it as a team, and it becomes very, very great. So. Oh yeah, HSLDA, we should talk about that. So HSLDA is the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And if you're going to homeschool, especially in the U.S., I don't know how it works for other countries, but if you're in the U.S., you should be a member of HSLDA. You just pay some fees. And these guys are a legal team, and they will represent you if anything ever goes sideways. If somebody shows up at the door and tries to sue you for not doing something right or whatever, which doesn't really happen much, but sometimes it does. You'll see people have more trouble if they've been public schooling and then they pull their kids out to homeschool. Sometimes the schools will show up and they say, well, are you doing it right, or what are you doing, or blah, blah, blah. They don't have the right to do that. And you can call them up and they will take care of it all. They pay all legal fees, they'll write letters, they'll do threats, they'll do all kinds of things, and they will leave you the heck alone. So it's not even that expensive to get a year's membership, and you absolutely should do that if you're going to be homeschooling. So it's like you go to school with your children. That's what it is. That's what it is. Let's be honest. I went to public school, and I graduated, and I remember a lot about science and a lot about math. I was never very good at English and all that stuff. I remember some things, but if I don't know something, I have to learn it with them. And again, that bonds your kids, and you learn it with them, and it makes you feel better. It improves your education. It's pretty nice. The HSLD, oh, HSLD is worth every penny. Yes, it is. Absolutely. Come on, I know there's other people out there. How many people we got on here? Oh, it doesn't show how many viewers. You guys should tell me how many are there. And I know there's questions out there, and this is why I wanted to do it live, so you could ask questions at the end. This will still be up, so if you want to watch it later, you'll be able to see it. So, if curriculum doesn't matter, how do we parents know the systematic way to teach kids? Ultimately, it doesn't matter. I mean, my kids learn a lot by watching YouTube. That if they don't know, Judah was struggling with diagramming sentences, and ACD has a lot of diagramming sentences, a lot. And honestly, with the simple ones, I was all right. When it got into the complicated ones, I was like, Judah, I don't know how to do this. I do not understand this. And so he got onto YouTube and watched some people diagramming sentences, and he figured it out, and he learned. You can learn on your own, as long as you have the information. So it's not usually that hard. At the end of the day, most stuff is pretty self-explanatory. You read the lesson, and if you follow the lesson, you will get the answers. Now, occasionally, like in math, if you're doing advanced algebra or calculus, maybe some trigonometry, you may not understand the formulas or whatever, and you have to go back and look up the formulas, and that's all fine. But as a general rule, it really isn't hard. The diagramming sentences thing has been the hardest thing I've done as a homeschooling dad yet, and I didn't know how to do it. But we found some resources that he could. So you love diagramming sentences, April? Well, you're crazy. Crazy. You have videos on your reward system? So our reward system, and this is going to be revamped. And April, you're going to help me do this. But I want to figure out, for ours, I had to figure out how many pages they need to do a week. As far as the requirements go, they have to have a certain number of pages done each day. This last year I did it average. So I gave them little clickers and they had to add up we added up the average number of pages. They had to have an average number per day done. We used to do it like stars in ACE after you finish a PACE, which is a packet of workbook. You get a star, and you had to have so many stars in order to get each privilege level. Oh, you okay? Come here. You bonk your head. You're all right. Come on this side, because I have the microphone on this side. Come over here on this side. There you go. So they have to have not so many demerits. A demerit is just something they do, like if they, when we were really strict, and I had to kind of get back to this, when I was at the Christian school, there was silence. If anybody talked at all, you got a demerit. You get 3 demerits in a day, and you get a detention. And a detention, when I was at the Christian school, they had to fill out a form. They had to take it home and get it signed by their parents. And yeah, so, and if they got a detention, I think you immediately were disqualified. I don't know if you were disqualified. Maybe there was a certain number of detentions you had to get if you were disqualified from a certain privilege level. But each privilege in ascending order had to get not as many demerits. We have a thing where you have to do a service project for our family and then a service project for the community. So that means a job or a chore that maybe is not part of normal chores. Like maybe there's that squeaky gate, or the latch is not centered right for the gate, and that's not anybody's chore to fix that. Daddy can fix it sometime, but maybe they go out and do that, or maybe they clean up the porch that's gotten in a disarray, or some other project for the family that's above and beyond the normal thing, and then one for the family. So Justice went the other day with April to the food bank thing and helped hand out food and pack boxes, and that would be a service project for him. Sometimes they notice that after a big windstorm, people's trash cans will all blow down, and they'll go down, one of the kids will run to someone's house and pick up all their trash cans and pick up the trash that fell out, and they'll count that as a service project. And so you can make up whatever you want. You can do whatever things. For the A privilege, they're allowed to play computer games only after 5 on weekends. Only after 5 on Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday they're allowed to play computer games basically whenever they want. But that's it. On the next privilege level, on C privilege, they're allowed to play computer games after 5 any day and on the weekends. And on E privilege, they can play computer games whenever they want. E privilege also gets 1 extra hour later of bedtime. They can stay up an hour later past all the other kids. I can't remember some of the other things. And we're probably going to revamp some of this stuff. They need to be attractive. They need to be difficult and attractive so that they can do them and work for them and have benefits and get bragging rights. When all the kids are going to bed and the other kids are like, see you little kids, I get to stay up until 10 in the summer and 9 in the fall. Let's have fun sleeping. And they do all that stuff, and then all the kids are like, man, I want to get on E privilege. And before you know it, they're all incentivized to do those types of things. So. X is no computer games. Yeah, there really isn't a privilege X, but sometimes they don't even finish enough to get on A privilege, and kids somehow ended up calling that X privilege. And with X, yeah, you don't get to play any computer games, that sort of a thing. Homeschooling is there. When homeschooling is there, a total months, days, hours required to complete per year. You'll have to look into the laws for your state, but I don't think there's any states that I know of that have any kind of regulations as to that. Most along the lines of it's either report it or not report it, or sometimes there's more detailed reportings. So, I mean, by that it is, in Wyoming, for instance, we have to inform, I need to do that form, by the way. We need to be able to, we need to tell the state that we will be homeschooling. And so you got to send a little thing into the district saying that we intend to homeschool, this is the curriculum we're going to use, and we sign it and send it in. And they give you a paper back that says we approve your request. But again, they don't get to approve us. That's actually not legal. HSLDA told me that. But it's whatever. They can send me whatever they want to send. We are required to report it. That's all we're required to do. In some states, like Idaho, where April's from, you don't have to report it at all. You don't have to do anything. In other states like California, you may have to have specifically more specific regimented instructions as to what you've got to do. But there's nothing about rules as to how many hours you got to spend. They might say you have to cover a certain subjects, but other than that, it's easier than you think. Oh, okay. I know you were looking for that form the other day, April, and I didn't see it. So, I requires 180 days. Oh, I see. For not that it was a bug. It's a grape leaf. Why is it all of a sudden bugging me now? You report yearly, right? Yeah. Well, we report at the beginning of the school year, or maybe in the summer. I don't need this. Thank you. Okay, come here. You don't want to come over here? So yeah, once a year we have to report, but the laws may be different in your state, and I am no expert on that. April showed me a little map the other day online. Maybe we'll link that somewhere that shows in your state what's required and what's not required. We'll try to find that resource for you guys. Anyways, it's a lot easier than you would think. Nobody shows up and says, "Are you doing it right?" No one sits around and asks you and is accusing you of anything. It's a lot easier and freer, especially today with this whole COVID thing. Homeschooling is growing by leaps and bounds through all this, and most parents are doing it, and at least while we're forced to. And then I think my sister's like, I think I'm just going to just do it myself instead of doing the stuff that the programs that the schools make me do, because I don't like the program the schools make me do. I'd rather do something more free. So it's a lot of options there. Oh, it's HSLDA. That's probably where the thing is. HSLDA is just an immensely wonderful resource, and it's not even that expensive. You should just figure that in as a cost of curriculum. So, oh, someone asked about how much it costs. It's not as expensive as you might think. With the ACE program that we use, the kids have to score their own work, and so you need to have a score key to every workbook. So for every workbook, you need to have the workbook you got to buy, and you got to have a score key for that workbook so they can score it. Then you have to have test score keys, which are just for you, so you can score their tests. And so those are a one-time deal. So if you're going to be homeschooling more than one child, you'd only have to buy those score keys one time. And at least for ACE, you can go to the ACE website, I believe it's schooloftomorrow.com, and you can do free diagnostic testing there. So you can sign up there, and they will tell you, they do like gap tests, basically. You just call it gap tests, where they say, these are concepts that your kids don't have mastered, and before we put you in this level, you should probably take these little workbooks. So you should finish this workbook number, this workbook number, this book number. That'll get you to this level where you can start off your school year. And so you can all do that for free. Oh, the test keys are with the regular score keys? Oh, well, that makes some sense. It's a bit overwhelming, and I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed because I don't know. I've never prepared for a school year before. I mean, I did last year, but we basically I had someone tell me how many books to order, and right now I'm doing it basically myself. Well, April's telling me what books to order, so I get to count her as myself. But yeah, it's harder, but it's not that big a deal. You can get through it. We can do it. I know the benefits for my kids. I know it. And you guys talk all the time about, why are your kids so kind to each other? Why are they so nice? They don't fight. They don't do this and that. And I think the main reason is because they just live around us. We've said before, I mean, Andrea, that we are training adults. We're not entertaining children. And so when your kids are around adults like you, they become more like you. You have relationships with you. And if your kids are in an environment where the kids are ruling, it's almost like Lord of the Flies, if you ever know what that is, where the kids are in charge, and that's where you get bullies and cliques and all kinds of things that are unhealthy for your kids. When I was in high school, we had a physics teacher. In that particular class, we had some kids that really did not get along. They'd be on the verge of fist fights on a regular basis. And the teacher it was so hard to deal with. He was just like, I don't care what you do as long as it's not in my classroom. And so they would be maybe making eyes at each other, making threats all during school. And the second they got out of the class, they would be fist fighting in the hall, and the teacher wouldn't do anything. They'd just sit there. And because, again, what you do out there is out there. What you do in here, that's all up to me. And so that's how I think a lot of times how it is. And when your kids are raised by other kids, that's I think the worst part. Which is funny because one of the main things I hear about homeschooling all the time is, what about socialization? What about your kids are obviously not going to know how to talk to people, not going to have any friends. They'll be a big lonely kid sitting on the slide with no friends. How terrible. They won't know how to interact with people, which is just not true. They just learn how to interact with adults a lot better than everybody else. And believe me, my kids had more fun with other kids than regular kids. When I was in high school, I was bullied a little, and I got really shy and reclusive, sitting all on my own, and that's what that did to me, is it made me more shy, and so I didn't hang out with a lot of those kids to begin with. I think the opposite is true in homeschooling anyways. I'm not fixing that right now, baby girl. We're having a video right now. We'll look at that a little bit later. Learning style and curriculum so you can click on shop online, know how your child learns best. So talk a bit more about the learning styles and curriculum that you can curriculum shop online, knowing how your child learns best. I honestly don't think it matters much which curriculum you choose. Get the one that you like and you're excited about, because if you're excited about it, you're going to keep doing it. What I see a lot with homeschooling moms is a lot of times they will try one curriculum this year and then another curriculum next year and then a different curriculum the year after that, because they're going to be talking a lot about, they think that their one's better than the other. I didn't like this small change in this one. I didn't like this small thing about that one. And you're honestly not going to find things you like about, you're not going to just love every curriculum. There's going to be things you hate. Andrea would say there'll be things you like, things you don't like, but you'll get used to it. And I think that's absolutely true. You get used to whatever it is, and I think the advantage of not changing very much, I think, is more beneficial. There's lots of things about ACE that I don't like, but as a general rule, it's extremely good. So I personally don't think the learning styles thing is much of an issue. Everybody learns differently, but we all can learn through the different learning styles. I mean, some people are more listeners, some people are more doers. I heard ones about music. Some people respond better to lectures. But ultimately, we all can learn doing all those things, and that's what about homeschooling is so nice. We've had some kids, Judah, for instance, was not very good in doing spelling. He was bad at it. And so we just changed how he did his spelling words. We had his spelling words in word building, and Andrea would set up a thing where he would draw a picture. You have to spell the word, ostrich, and you had to draw an ostrich. And then he had to draw the word tree and the ostrich with it. And he had to make a big collage of all the words he had. And for some reason, that worked better in his brain. We still use the same curriculum. We still took the same test. But you just help them learn and supplement those things as needed as you work on them. I think it's personally less about a curriculum choice and more about figuring out how to deal with your child. You're not going to find something custom made for your child. Maybe you'll get close, but either way, you're going to have to change things around. They have to take subjects they wouldn't like. I could choose my subjects in high school. There are certain core ones. You can add all kinds of different curriculums and electives that they have in ACE for our curriculum anyways. And you can always add more stuff. I mean, homeschool is whatever you want to do. So, I mean, I know some people it's like, well, we'll use ACE for these subjects, but for science we're going to use this, and then for math we're going to use that. And you can do that. Or you can make stuff up. When the kids were doing Greek, I did the Greek class, and I said I had very specific things I wanted to teach our kids on how they speak Greek. I did not want them to just go to Rosetta Stone or any other sort of canned language thing, because I wanted them to know the pronunciation that would have been used in first century when Jesus walked the earth, and I wanted to know certain definitions that maybe had been changed. And so I got to do what I wanted to do. And so I brought them the curriculum I thought was good for that, and I gave them flashcards that I personally made. And so you can custom make classes to do whatever you want to do. Sometimes you have people in your family, maybe you have an Uncle Bill who loves taking the kids to the park, and maybe he can handle PE. You want to take them to the park, make them do so many jumping jacks or whatever, or do whatever you want to do, some sort of regimen for PE for that. Or maybe you can have somebody else who really likes science, and you can farm these things out to other people in your family or community. You can do whatever you want. What's our time? We're still doing all right. You have the freedom to do what you want. But again, as you saw in the curriculum, the video, that doing the homeschooling is so powerful for your kids. And if you stop or you quit, you don't get those benefits. That's the most important thing. So if you have two different curriculums, one will make your kid score 90% in math, and one will make your kid score 85% in math. If it's a nightmare to teach the one that goes 90%, I would just avoid it. 85% is just as good as 90%, and that's the part where I talked about in the presentation I saw with him. He mentioned the different curriculums, and they listed a whole bunch of curriculums, and it didn't make a difference which curriculum you used. The important thing is you focus through it. If it's hard and cumbersome and you don't like it, the kid doesn't like it, it doesn't matter how well they score, in my opinion. It matters if you finish. PE is not something that needs to be taught. Kids be playing outside most of the time. It's all exercise. Well, I guess that's up to you. You can decide how that works. Some people want to do baseball and football and do the different sports and those types of things, and that's not something they'll do on their own most of the time, regimented. But hey, why don't you sit with Dad? No? Okay. Hey, you guys, don't fight, okay? How about you give Daddy the chair? If you guys are going to fight over the chair, I'll just take the chair. Come on. Claudia, bring the chair to Daddy. Nope, Daddy's going to take the chair. Nope, nope. You guys are fighting over it. See you at Fishes and Loaves. We appreciate you hanging by. All right, any other burning questions out there? Don't be afraid to ask them. If there's something you want to know about, I can do my best to answer it. How big is a public school there, out of curiosity? I don't know what you mean by big. I don't know how many kids go there or anything. Our town is only 1,000, so there's surrounding areas of people that go there, but I can't tell you for sure. Not working, just pick your battles. It's a laid back attitude. I think it works. It has to work. That's been born of us, trying to micromanage all kinds of little things. So, does the age matter in preschool? Is it important for a child to be a first grade at the age of 7? No, none of that's important. In fact, I think if you're early on, their attitude towards schooling, it can form how they are the rest of school. And so if they're struggling, I think it's better to let them wait a year and do it again later. Because if they just have to struggle through it, or do it twice, that's what we've always done. Do the same curriculum, it's the same program 2 times in a row. So. And Claudia, don't do that. When I sat down to help him for help with math, I ended up crying. Yeah, that happens a lot. It depends. It's not for everybody. But if you were already in public school and your dad was just helping you, that might be, it might just be different. Maybe he's not good to fight. So there's always going to be problems with math. I think math is one of those ones that people struggle with. And there's been lots of stress in our house over the math pages. But you get through them. I feel the Charlotte Mason method. Andrea did a lot of Charlotte Mason stuff. So we had several things. I'm sure she pulled from there over the years and supplemented different things. She would do those nature notebooks. If you guys ever watch them do that, where they draw pictures of nature things, that was not something that was part of AECE. That's just something she did. And you can add all kinds of stuff in. My eyes look swollen? Sorry. Don't know why. Can't tell you. Alrighty, well, about an hour and a half. Maybe we should cut it short here unless there's any other burning questions. Are there any college level classes for homeschoolers? I mean, you're thinking about AP programs, and so yeah, you can get really hard. You can get college curriculum and teach it at high school if you want to do that. But where that all starts from getting college credit from taking more advanced courses, and I don't know that that's something you can necessarily do. That's usually a deal they have with certain schools, but you can test out of most classes in college if you're able to. So, I mean, in that respect, if your kid knows the information, yeah, you can do that. Yeah, I know. Good job. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for watching with us. Good luck in your homeschooling efforts. If you have questions, you can leave them in the comments down below, and I'll do my best to answer them if I know the answers to them. We've been homeschooling a long time. I haven't been necessarily doing all the homeschooling for a long time, but I have done it in the past. And I used to run a Christian school that did the same curriculum that we use, so I can certainly answer any questions that you might want to ask. And if not, I can sure find out some answers. So we appreciate all you guys for watching, and we will see you next time, very soon. Look for the next vlog coming up today or tomorrow.